Now, it is good to be here, and it is a little strange because it has been a long time since I have preached from this particular pulpit. And yes, I realize I'm in the middle here and not right at the pulpit. When I stand by that, it comes up to about my eyeballs, and it's a little bit hard to see over. And besides, I've learned to move about in worship, and it means that John's having trouble keeping up with me. But thank you. There are two reasons that I want to thank you. And the first is, over 25 years ago, this congregation called me as an intentional interim minister to go to various congregations on your behalf and lead them through transitions, and then to make reports back here regularly and provide me a church home. In other words, the kind of ministry that I do would not be possible if it weren't for you. But second, and even more importantly, I am thankful because at the same time that you provide me a church home to which I may return when I'm in between places, you also send me out with prayers, love, good wishes. And I've had people that have tracked me on Facebook to see how I am doing. I've been remembered at Christmas time. I've had some that have called me up and said, "Hey, how's it going?" "Oh, it's been a little tough this last week." "Well, you're doing what God sent you to do and what we called you to do. Keep on going." And that kind of encouragement and that kind of relationship makes my kind of ministry possible. I wouldn't have been able to do it for over 35 years without that kind of support and love. And so for that, I am grateful. But I have a confession to make. I had all kinds of trouble with today's passage. It sounds so straightforward at the beginning, doesn't it? Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things unseen. We'd say, yeah, that's gorgeous. That's beautiful. But I have a question for you. Does it define what faith is? Or maybe, does it give us a description or start to paint a picture of faith? That sometimes, deep down in our hearts, we may know it. And other times, we may be kind of walking in a fog, wondering where was that sense of faith? I'll tell you, that description is wonderful. And so then I thought, what are some other descriptions of faith? And Frederick Buechner, who is a favorite theologian of mine, says that faith is disorderly, intermittent, and full of surprises. He contrasts that to theology, which we write as systematic and orderly, and this leads to this, leads to this, leads to this. Faith doesn't do that. Faith is like putting it into a blender and seeing what comes out. I love that image. Catherine Matthews Huey, who was the retired dean of Amistad Chapel of the United Church of Christ in Cleveland, said that faith makes visible what is invisible. Another wonderful image. For me, maybe, faith is a journey. It goes its own way sometimes. It's a mystery. And It's life-giving. Faith reminds us of who we are and to whom we belong, that we are called and gathered and loved as people of God. And faith reminds us of that. And sometimes we have to keep reciting it to ourselves and say, someday maybe, God, I'll believe this. But faith keeps reminding us who we are and to whom we belong. Now, one of the wonderful examples of faith would be Abraham and Sarah, for they left a home and everything that was familiar to them, and they journeyed into a land unknown. And if you read the account in Genesis, you'll hear, and God said, go to a place that I will tell you. And so he gathered up everything and left, and nobody knows where that place was at that time. And sometimes Abraham and Sarah took things into their own hands in order to help fulfill God's promises, but most times they trusted that somehow, despite all of the evidence to the contrary, that they would have descendants, and somehow, despite all evidence to the contrary, that they would land in this home that God had prepared for them. It is an example of faith and of journeying and of going into the unknown. The assurance of things hoped for. Conviction of things unseen. But today, in today's world, for me this last week especially, it was hard. And part of it is knowing that there were 3 shootings in 1 week, 3 mass shootings, which numbers did not survive. Knowing that people from a family outing to Walmart were shot. Seeing pictures of kids in Forest, Mississippi, who were kept in a gym because they did not know when their parents would be released. And it is hard to keep faith. And remember 2 years ago, a white supremacist rally in Charlottesville. It is hard to keep faith of that vision of God in this world working for good. When it seems recently we've gone backwards. And yet, there's one other thing about this faith. Besides being disorderly, besides being intermittent and full of surprises, there's one thing that I've learned. This faith is stubborn. It is persistent. Just as God is stubborn and persistent and continues to work in this world for the good, just as God is stubborn and persistent and continues to invite us into this community where the law is love, just as God welcomes, forms, molds, embodies, all of that, the assurance of things hoped for. It seems that hope is more than just a wish that this world is going to change, but it is a conviction that it is, and that God is at work in it and invites us to be a part of that. As we are in that community, that is governed by the law of love. Faith may be the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things unseen. It may be playful at times, joyous, uplifting, and hope-filled. And it is those times when it is sweet. It is those times that nourish our hearts and our souls, and it is those times when we may move forward to be about the work of God's realm. You see, it seems to me that faith is synonymous with our relationship with God. That God's presence and invitation are there for us. And that sometimes we are aware of it to a greater sensitivity than others. For me, that is the hope. That in God's realm, the arc may be long, but God still is present working for good. And for us, we will do our best, and we will follow to that journey that sometimes we don't even know the destination. And think perhaps, maybe, for now, this faith journey is enough. Because coming together in a community where faith is the base and where love is the law, it means that we are welcome in spite of our gender, in spite of our ethnicity, in spite of the color of our skin, in spite of our sexual orientation, in spite of our own gender identification, and maybe, and this is the good news, especially because of them, God welcomes us. That, to me, is sufficient in the journey for now, and gives me pause and gives me grace to welcome one another. Amen.